Hi guys, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to tell you about some unfortunate news that happened here on 16th Street in Denver, Colorado. 2025 has had no shortage of bad news. You've got these crazy fires in LA, and of course there was that driver who ran over a bunch of people in New Orleans a couple weeks ago. Although this story isn't as crazy, it's still important if you live in Denver or live in Colorado. And it's also really frustrating because it could totally have been avoided. So I'll go into that story and also mention how America has changed a lot in the last few decades. In the background here, I'll show you some of 16th Street and Denver in general where this happened. 16th Street has a lot of homeless in general because it's a tourist area, but it's even more dangerous because there's so much construction there. And a lot of it's like going through a maze. You don't know where to turn or where to go, and people could come out of nowhere, so it's definitely not very safe, which is why they need a big police presence, which they don't have. So this past Saturday on January 11th, 2025, this guy, Elijah Caudill, ended up stabbing 3 people. And one of them unfortunately died, who is a 71-year-old flight attendant named Celinda Levno, who was stabbed in the throat. I couldn't even imagine how brutal that would be. She was actually on a layover, so I'm guessing she just came downtown on the train from the airport, probably just came to get dinner, because there's a lot of popular areas around 16th Street, and this guy just randomly out of nowhere just slit her throat. And then on the next day, on Sunday evening around 8 o'clock, he ended up stabbing and killing another guy, and that's when he was taken into custody. So over the first day, he had stabbed 3 people over about a 45-minute period, and then the next day around 8 o'clock. And so you've got this guy wandering around with a knife in a tourist area and no police presence. So Elijah's grandparents said that he's had mental issues for a long time and was probably schizophrenic because he said he's been hearing voices in his head. And Elijah also told his grandparents that he was using hard drugs like crystal meth, heroin, fentanyl, and marijuana. He dropped out of school around 6th or 7th grade and bounced around in between 2 or 3 different cities, but mostly lived in Denver. So I always wonder what came first, the chicken or the egg. When did this mental health issue actually occur? I obviously feel bad if anyone's born with this, but a lot of this can happen in your life from using drugs. Most people think marijuana is this safe wonder drug, but it does increase your chance of getting schizophrenia big time. And your highest chance of getting schizophrenia is in your teens and early 20s. And then, of course, all of these other hard drugs can contribute to that as well. I have a buddy from high school who started using drugs around the time he's probably, 13, 14, 15. So he's been using for 30 years, and he sent me and my other mutual friends a message last year telling us to stop talking to him through his teeth. And I was like, what are you talking about, dude? I'm out in Denver. You're on the East Coast. My other friends are busy with kids. And what happened was over the years, he lost all his teeth from using drugs, and he ended up getting a full dental implants. And he was convinced that there was a microchip in his teeth, and we were like using walkie-talkies or something to communicate through him through his teeth, and thought we were messing with him. And he was dead serious. And this is a kid who could have did anything with his life, but chose that road. And what are drugs ultimately? They're a way to escape reality. So if you use them enough, you might escape reality permanently. And that's probably what's happening with the majority of homeless people out there, who you could tell are just tweaked out of their mind most of the time. So you have a society that's legalized a gateway drug that increases your chance of schizophrenia, and then at the same time decriminalized hard drugs, especially in Colorado. Most people didn't think it was a big deal if they legalized weed. I don't see that as being a big deal. They could get some tax revenue, and many people try it anyway. But I think marijuana was a Trojan horse to legalize hard drugs, which has basically happened within a 10-year period. They've legalized not just marijuana since then, but also decriminalized hard drugs like fentanyl, meth, cocaine, and other hard drugs to basically just a misdemeanor if you have up to 4 grams. And it doesn't even matter if it's a misdemeanor, felony, or a death penalty because the cops aren't out there enforcing it. I've only seen maybe once or twice in the 2.5 years I've lived in Denver that the cops are actually going out and busting people who are openly been using drugs, like right next to the Capitol building, 16th Street, Colfax, and all around the shelters in between Rhino and downtown, just all over the place, along the river, etc. Even the gay marriage issue was probably a Trojan horse too, because everyone thought, let's just legalize this so we don't have to hear about it again. It's no big deal. Several years later, now you're going to have to say what your pronouns are. And it's Rainbow Day, Rainbow Week, Rainbow Month, etc. Totally promoted. And you never hear the end of it, basically. I do tours in Denver all the time, and I talk to tourists every day, and they wonder all the time why there's no people downtown. And I'm like, well, because people don't want to get their throat slit. Why would people come out of the suburbs to come downtown where people are going out of their minds on drugs?
Really sad. That woman was stabbed right around here.
There's been a 30% increase in homelessness in the last year, which is up from around 5,500 people in 2016 to almost 10,000 now, which is almost twice as many. So you basically have all of these like zombies, or what I like to say, the Walking Dead, wandering around, doing drugs and hanging out in the streets all day. And I'm sure a small percentage of these people are experiencing homelessness, but it's clear more of them are experiencing a combination of like fentanyl, weed, and meth and booze. I even passed one of the alleys where I see a lot of people using drugs. And it was real early in the day, so there wasn't anyone around except for these 2 guys who spoke Spanish to me. I'm not sure what they said, but if anyone speaks Spanish out there, you could put it in the comments. But I can imagine it was something about drugs. And it's sad, too, because it wasn't always like this in America. Back in the day, like the downtown city centers were where everyone went to shop and get entertainment, just like in most of the cities in the world. If you look at old photos of Denver, you could see people around 16th Street and on Colfax shopping. And this wasn't just tourists, but it was locals too. But then America began to change. You had not just big demographic changes, the civil rights movement, and eventually the welfare state. The inner cities went downhill, and everyone moved out to the suburbs to get away from the increasing crime and riots that were happening all over America in the late 60s. People like to complain about Americans driving so much, but they wouldn't have had to drive back and forth from the suburbs to downtown if there wasn't such high crime. I lived in China for a long time, and you will see 0 drug addicts and homeless people. Because people learn that there's very negative consequences if you break the law or use drugs, so you don't go down that road. The people there, and even young students in college, think of marijuana as like crack or meth. Like they would never even consider using that, for the most part. So they stop even considering it before they even start, which is a much more cost-effective way than spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in treatment or jails. I was just looking at how much a murder prosecution and all the jail time and things cost. It's $8.8 million. I mean, think about it. How many taxes do you pay in a year? Even if you pay 10 grand, like how many people's taxes would equal up to 8.8 million? And so there's something to be said about a lot of countries that instill more fear to use drugs. And here we basically give them love. They get 3 square meals a day. They get a roof over their head, plenty of resources, and even in some places they get checks each month. And some people say, well, China's an authoritarian regime, but you see that across all of East Asia. And even when I was in Mexico City and Lima, Peru last year, and their downtown tourist area is very nice. Now, of course, in the outskirts, there could be some more crime and things like that, but they at least keep the tourist centers nice. And that could be said about most of the world I've been, except for the Western countries, of course, who give billions and billions of dollars to keep people in this situation and never moving on with their lives. So most locals today don't go to 16th Street in Denver or Colfax nearby, which is also another cesspool, as I mentioned. But 16th Street is next to the Performing Arts Center and many restaurants and bars and things to do. And it's also right next to the convention center, which is enormous. They get about 150 different conventions a year, which draws anything from a few 100,000 people to almost 1 million people. So you have tens of thousands of people every month coming in and staying at all the hotels next to the convention center, which is 16th Street. And these people will read online that 16th Street's the main tourist area, which it is, but they don't know that it's all been under construction for several years now. Hopefully they'll finish it in a year or two, but it's definitely not the safest place because of that. So I took this video early in the morning around 8:30 or so when it was like 20 degrees outside, so there wasn't too many people out there. I assume most of the homeless people, since it's cold, could stay indoors most of the time. I know in summer they have to go out early because they have to clean the places out. I imagine they're like super filthy, so they have to clean everything. But yeah, in the summer, warmer weather, there's much more people out. And I did pass 2 police officers and maybe 1 or 2 cars as I went down one way and then back. But that was basically it. And of course, in the morning, there's not too much stuff going on, but they definitely need a bigger police presence. But police funding and recruitment's been down since the incident with George Floyd. I really don't see police in general around Denver. And all of the people on my tours say the same thing. I'm like, do you ever see a cop? They're like, no, which is super weird. I know a couple of my neighbors have had the window on their car broken 4 or 5 times, and I saw another broken window a couple weeks ago. Luckily, mine hasn't been broken yet, but there's been people trying to steal cars all around, not just here, but all of Denver and the metro and other cities. Denver was number 1 for property crimes. I think it's gone down a little bit, but you never see cops around at night trying to do anything preventative. So let's go into Elijah Caudill's history a little bit. So he's 24 now. In 2021, when he just turned 21, he had his first incident. He was staying in Westminster, which is northwest of Denver, on some private property. And the property manager saw him a few times. And on that one particular day, he was like going to the bathroom next to a dumpster. And so he told him to leave. And he actually thought he was leaving. And when he got back to his truck and turned around, he was waving a knife and like put it into his chest and swearing at him, like basically threatening him. The police arrested him the next day. Over the next few months, that charge got reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor. He got 2 years probation. He violated his probation. He ended up getting about a year in jail. But right there, you could see some pretty serious issues that he probably needed to either do more time, or at least when he committed crimes in the future, as I mentioned, that he should have stayed in prison longer. So he had other petty crimes like an attempted purse snatching and a case involving stolen baseball cards that was dismissed. I don't know why. He reportedly put a woman in a chokehold and hit her after she refused to play basketball with him. And while he was in jail for the later case, he faced 3 more misdemeanor arrests after assaulting 2 inmates and shattering a glass door at the jail. And he inappropriately touched another woman without consent at the Denver Cares detox facility. I'm not sure if that was the other woman, but he's arrested in January 2024 for that. So he was released 2 months ago in November and was waiting to get a bed in a mental health facility. And he was actually supposed to go to court on December 20th. Just 3 weeks ago, and failed to appear in court. And so he should have been in jail for that, but obviously they couldn't find him. And so this past Saturday and Sunday, he went on this crime spree. So the mayor went down to 16th Street on Monday evening and made an address about this. And he said, "This is an isolated, exceedingly rare incident. We have not seen random attacks of violence like this in our city center for as long as we can remember. It is important for folks to know that this is not a systematic or ongoing problem. But you could see in the paper, in the 6 months leading up to the murders, 65 violent crimes were reported within a block of the mall. That's more than twice a week. The Denver police chief, Ron Thomas, said Caudill does not have a violent history. So I'm not sure if they got high off the fumes on 16th Street when they were making that address. Maybe they had a little psychosis because, to say that there's no violence and that this guy wasn't a violent guy is a little bit off, to say the least. Just last week, next to my apartment, there's a big construction area where they're going to make some apartments. And that day they were off. It was Sunday. And there was some guy who was losing his mind, threatened to kill people and himself, and was just having a complete meltdown. My neighbor called the police. They came by, and they luckily got him to leave safely. But there's these people all over the city doing this stuff. And the laws trying to evict people in Denver are insane as well, and also a danger to society. I've got a guy that's not above me, but above in front of me here that I heard didn't pay rent. And I was thinking, oh, maybe he hasn't paid for a month or two and they'll eventually evict him. I assume they could do that like after 3 months, for instance. You would think within 3 months would be reasonable, but it's not. You would think 6 months at the latest. Nope. He's been there over a year not paying rent, and they still have not been able to evict him. The sheriff's come a couple times and set a notice. They're not allowed to change the locks. And the other crazy part is that guy, ironically, in the last month or so, ended up staying with another friend, I guess. And so in the last year, he's had all these people come in and out. He's been selling drugs, and all of these homeless and drug addicts are coming in and out. And so one of the dudes who's his buddy is now staying in that apartment. And they turned off the electricity a couple months ago. So we've got a laundry room downstairs, which obviously has electricity. So he's going down there to like charge his phone and charge like a lamp. And he also put a microwave in there to be able to heat up food. And so you've got this homeless dude who's not even on the lease that's able to live in my apartment building. What happens if this dude like overdoses or even dies or makes a fire and burns down the building when I'm sleeping or something? I mean, a complete health hazard. And of course, we've complained, but it doesn't matter. These people are more protected than us. And I imagine this is probably the same kind of thing that happened in LA. You've got tens of thousands of homeless and people who have come up through the border illegally. And it's not easy just to stay downtown. And who wants to stay like on the streets? You probably go up in the woods right above the city. And even in LA in the winter, like January, like it is now, it gets down into the 40s at night. They're making fires up there for sure to stay warm, and people are passed out and on drugs. I bet you anything that a fire started in one of these encampments, and it was super windy, and now all these people have lost their homes and ruined the economy in that area. That'll take years to come back because they didn't want to deal with this issue. So anyway, really tragic story for all those involved. Celinda Levno, who lost her life, had worked at American Airlines since 1989. That's about 35, 36 years. She probably could have retired, but maybe liked the work. I'm not sure if she had kids or anything, but she could have been enjoying her retirement and time with her friends or family. I'm not sure if she's someone's grandmother, but super tragic. And also, of course, of that other guy who died, who I didn't get any information about him. I guess America's going to have a conversation about reopening the insane asylums, because this is nuts to have all these mentally ill people all over the country. And by the way, that isn't just a conservative thing about like Reagan closing all the insane asylums. That was actually part of the civil rights movement. And they were treated so poorly in the insane asylums that there was a movement basically to let them out. And then at the same time, they did want to save money. And this was the same time that they were getting better medicine to treat mental health. And so for the time, it actually wasn't a bad idea. But now this problem's blown up. I think I'd seen in 1955, there was about 550,000 people in mental asylums at that time. And you've got like 18 million people now in America that have mental health issues. So It's no doubt one of the biggest issues in this country, and I imagine if these people didn't start using drugs, we wouldn't have had this big of an issue to begin with. So anyway, I'll do some more of these crime videos in Denver and Colorado and continue with some of my true crime videos. I was just finishing up some stuff on JonBenet Ramsey, and then I've got a trip in Colombia. I also wanted to finish up with a couple videos from my last trip in Peru. That was kind of cool. So anyway, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.